Hello, everyone.
Professor Rama, I think you're muted, so we can't hear you.
Oops, sorry. Hello, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everyone joining us from around the world. I'm B.L. Ramakrishna. I'm the Chief Academic Advisor for Plaksha University and will be serving as the moderator for this session. I'm delighted to welcome you all for the sixth and final presentation on the Tech4Thought series. Tech4Thought series is a series of public lectures on technology, policy, and society hosted by Plaksha University and Carnegie India to celebrate the launching of Plaksha University this fall. The mission for Tech4Thought is to build a foundational understanding of the key emerging technologies of the 21st century that significantly impact our lives and to discuss their implications on education and policy. The presentation today is on future of technology education, opportunities and challenges. We are delighted to have with us two eminent academicians and researchers as our discussants today. Professor Uday Desai and Professor Aditya Malik will bring to bear the different and yet complementary perspectives on the topic of the discussion today. It's my pleasure to introduce to you both of them. Professor Desai is the founding director of IIT Hyderabad, and Professor Aditya Malik is the professor and dean of academic affairs at Plaksha University. Professor Desai has a distinguished career. He spent 20 plus years at IIT Bombay as a faculty member after a 10-year or so stint at Washington State University in USA. He then served for 10 years as the founding director of IIT Hyderabad and is now an emeritus professor there and also a distinguished professor at Plaksha University. He holds a BTech degree from IIT Kanpur and then MS from State University of New York at Buffalo and a PhD from Johns Hopkins University. His research interests are in wireless communication, sensor networks, cyber-physical systems, Internet of Things, and AI. He chairs presently the Scientific Advisory Committee on the National Mission on Interdisciplinary Cyber-Physical Systems. He's a fellow of the Indian National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Science, and the Institution of Electronic and Telecommunication Engineers. It's a pleasure to have you, Uday, here. Professor Aditya Malik has had an academic career that transcends national and international boundaries. He was the Vice Chancellor of K.R. Mangalam University, the founding professor and dean of the Historical Studies Department at Nalanda University, and a professor in School of Life and Political Sciences at Canterbury, University of Canterbury in New Zealand. Professor Malik was trained at St. Stephen's College, New Delhi, and Deccan College in Pune for his undergraduate and graduate degrees. He received then his DPhil and habilitation at the internationally acclaimed South Asia Institute at University of Heidelberg in Germany. Professor Malik has received the Inspired Teacher Award in 2016, the highest civilian recognition of university teachers in India from the then President of India, Dr. Pranab Kumar Mukherjee. This is going to be a very interactive session and we'll intersperse the discussion with question and answers sessions from the audience. We request everyone to have their questions ready and be on the chat, but video switched on and mics muted. If you kindly could do that, would appreciate that until you're recognized by the moderator. It's my pleasure now to kind of open the session with a few remarks. So in the opening remarks, Uday Desai and Aditya Malik will bring to bear many points, including the implications for education or the various tools and technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, the need to address the so-called wicked problems of society and also complex problems which are not only technical, but socio-technical, economic, political, cultural, and so on. And finally, the importance of keeping in mind the unintended consequences of technology. Unintended does not always mean necessarily the unexpected. So how can we bring this into the education field is something that they'll talk about, and among other things. So right now, I will ask Professor Uday Desai to start with 5-minute opening remark, followed by a 5-minute opening remark by Professor Aditya Malik. Over to you, Uday.
Unmute, I think, still.
Okay, so thank you so much, Rama, for the introduction and for setting the stage. I'm in fact honored to be in this particular workshop, and I think I'm looking forward to the discussion. My opening remarks may not exactly be in tune with some of the questions that you have posed. I'm just hoping that some of those questions will come up in our discussions as we go along, because otherwise it will take me a long time to kind of address them. Those are fairly complex ones. What I'll do is I'll just, as an educationist, I'll just give my perspective a little bit, on some of the things that we normally come across. So let me just, let's see if I can, how do I share the presentation? Is there anything here at the bottom? Hello? Can somebody?
You can.
Share screen. Okay.
Yes.
Share screen, you should be able to.
Okay. Now share screen. Where in heavens is my presentation now? Show all windows. Okay. Now it should come. Just okay. Here we go. Plaksha. Okay. I think this should be visible.
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. Okay. I'm trying to go full screen. Let's see. Okay. It's better. Okay. So what I'll do is, let me start with this small cartoon, and I think this is sort of says it all. Okay. And though this is meant for little kids, I think the same is happening in higher education also, so the key thing I feel is, technology and other things, we should bring fun back into education. Education should become a joyful experience, which today it is more of a exercise and, an arduous thing, and something that I have to do in some sense rather than enjoying it. So I'll just lay down my perspective out here, and that will help in terms of the way we are going. What should have, there is, I think later on also we are talking about breadth versus depth. So I thought I'll just preempt it a little bit and talk a little out here. So these are some 11 points that I've jotted down. There is overlap among them. Okay. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it also. And I think it's pretty clear in terms of what I'm talking about here. And my hope is that some of these points obviously will come up when we get into a little deeper discussion out here. One of the new things that come up, there is I think it's a World Bank report or one of the institutes, I'm forgetting. And what they're talking about is soft skills, not conventionally as we talk about in terms of, communication and all those other things, but more in terms of these three things, which are point number 11, perseverance, collaboration, and empathy. It's a very unusual kind of a thing. They define these to be the soft skills in our overall spectrum, along with technology and other parts of it. Okay, so anyway, I'm sure people have read this, so I won't repeat it. If required, I can go back to it whenever it's there, since I have limited time out here. Okay. The other thing, I would like to emphasize out here is, and I strongly believe, it's in a technological education, the exposure to science and technology should be very early in the game. Often what happens is that we talk a lot of generalities in the first year, many times the second year. And this is based on my experience with students, right through my days at IIT Bombay and also at IIT Hyderabad. A year goes by and the guy says, so I came here to study electronics. Where is electronics? Or I came here to study artificial intelligence. Where is AI? Okay. So I think it is important, because otherwise you lose the students. And that's one point I wanted to get across. And the other one was item number 10, that we need to encourage creativity, design, and critical thinking. This is very easy to write down, perhaps the easiest line to write down, but one of the most difficult things to actually execute, in modern education system. Okay. The other key elements which I think we should have, and I'm a big believer, though not many necessarily agree with me, I think we have to have unstructured education. I think education has over the years become too structured, too highly programmed, chapter 1, chapter 2, section 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. I think, nobody learns that way. So I think, we don't work that way in life also. Eventually we present everything that way. I'm presenting in a very structured manner. But when I was preparing the slides, my thoughts were going back and forth, they were not necessarily going in a linear fashion. Non-linearity is important. Dynamism. Normally what happens, there is a lot of hype, in the beginning. Okay, we do a lot of things. Okay, and after about 5 years, a certain thing sets in and we don't want to change. So I think we need to build into the system that the dynamism is part and parcel of the system and not something that we do, once in 10 years or something like that. Modularity, flexibility, everybody talks about it. Mixed discipline courses. One of the things that one talks about nowadays is multidisciplinarity, where we want to bring social sciences, humanities into technology and vice versa. We want technology also to be into humanities and social sciences. What I feel is that we need to create these joint courses, and this is again based on experience. Where examples I'm giving, you don't have to do this particular part. AI and humanity, can the two come together? Gene editing and society, how do we put this? Human-computer interaction is a classic example, and a lot of work has gone into this particular part. I think this will bring the two communities to closer, the humanities and social sciences and the technology. The other part, which we are completely ignoring many times, and which is really a huge burden both on the students and faculty, is we need to have some innovation in exams and evaluation. Same thing has been done for God knows last 50 years, maybe even 100 years. Okay. So something has to be thought about. We need to be creative out there. Okay. Some key technologies I think have to come in irrespective of what the main disciplines are. I would say AI, gene editing. This is very big to me. I think, though I don't know much about it, I keep reading bits and pieces out here, but this is going to change the world dramatically. And as Yuval Harari says, AI and gene editing or AI and biotech, the force would be so powerful, one wonders how humanity will basically counter that force. Smaller forces, digital fabrication, mobility technologies, how are we going to move? Currently we have a certain concept. I think there is carbon footprint issues come in. Energy storage, not energy generation. To me, that's the easier problem. The harder problem is energy storage. So I'll stop at this, and with this another slide, which I like a lot. So I thought, since it's education, I'll say it out here. A truly great library contains something in it to offend everybody. I'll stop at this particular point, Rama. Thank you so much. Shall I?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Uday. If you could unshare it,
Yeah, I'll do. I'm just looking for that.
Yeah, Aditya is going
to unshare. He has done that for me because I'm looking for that button.
I think so. Yeah, I think he has already unshared.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Aditya, please go ahead with your opening remarks and unmute yourself.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rama, for inviting me to this session. I'm also really honored, and I'm also a bit of trepidation. I feel like I've just learned how to swim, but I've jumped into a pool with Olympic swimmers. We've been thinking about technology and education for 30, 40 years. I've prepared some slides and some introductory remarks, which I hope at some point maybe that they can sort of synthesize with what Uday has been saying. I wanted to actually look back at what technology means, or at least the kind of original sense of technology, and that technology occupies a kind of configuration or a matrix of different concepts, which then, in a sense, historically have become eroded. So maybe we could look at Akshat, if you could show us the first slide.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is visible. So I think most of us know, that technology is, well, it's derived from techne and logia, which has to do with skill and craft, and also with thinking. So it's a combination of both thinking and a skill and a craft. But many of us may not know that together with techne and logia, we also have episteme and poesis. Episteme, which has to do with knowing and knowledge, and poesis, which has to do with bringing forth something or manifesting something, bringing forth or manifesting an idea in the world. And so in its kind of original sense, and I know that this semantic sense has been lost and changed and, different social and political historical contexts, it's moved and altered, but in its kind of original sense, if one can talk about an original sense of any concept, technology is the skill or craft of manifesting something through which the world gets known or revealed. So to manifest something through a skill or a craft and then get to know something about the world. And I think this is a very significant understanding or definition of technology which often gets overlooked. And I talk about why it's getting overlooked and why we have, in a sense, lost that meaning or understanding of technology, which I find really inspiring, to be able to know something about the world by manifesting an idea. But so let's see the next slide. So I think what's been sort of dominant the last 200 or 300 years, and this ties up also to Industry 1.0. And today I think we're going to talk about Industry 4.0, which is a very recent trend. During the Industrial Revolution and around that time, the sort of utilitarian model has become very dominant in the world, utilitarian and transactional model. So that technology itself, our understanding of technology has been reduced, I would state, been reduced to mere instrumentation. So when we think about technology, we think about instrumentation, or about the manipulation and control of the natural world, because it's been reduced to instrumentation. So it's no longer about revealing or knowing the world through the manifestation of an idea. Rather, it's about the manipulation and control of the natural world. And this is what this process has been happening the last 200 or 300 years. And I want to say this because it addresses, in a sense, also what both Rama and Uday were talking about, the kind of wicked or unintended consequences of technology, which I don't think are the consequences of technology on its own. They're the consequences of the kind of philosophical and political context inside of which we are thinking. So this shift in the meaning and understanding of technology from revealing and knowing and manifesting an idea in the real world to instrumentation has resulted in a kind of alienation between human beings and the natural world. And this is what we're encountering. And this is what in a sense, the grand challenges that are so essential and so part of the vision of Plaksha address. Is kind of increasing imbalance we see in the world, ecologically, environmentally, and there's some reason or some source of that. And one of the sources I'm suggesting is this kind of gap or this understanding of technology that has come into being, that it is about the control and manipulation of the natural world and resources. And of course, alongside that, there is the fear of the creation of an alternative technological world that is going to be a threat to human existence. So we have all these concerns about AI and also Industry 4.0. There could be a concern about that. The increasing automation of all kinds of activities that were normally conducted by human beings or normally a part of human labor are now going to be conducted by machines or by intelligent machines and by smart technologies. So let's see the last slide, Akshay. So what I'm trying to say, and I think this might be obvious to many of you, is that the meaning of technology is not neutral. It's tied up to the predominant social and political philosophies or ideologies of a given historical period. And I'm suggesting since the Industrial Revolution, the preeminent ideology has been utilitarian and transactional. So the epistemic framework, has kind of furthered or supported the exploitation and control of natural resources, which has led to a kind of imbalance, as we can see. Everyone is talking about environmental imbalances and how do we actually rectify that. And we live in a paradoxical and contradictory world. And I just want to share that I was reading recently about these new awards that have been instituted, the Earthshot Awards. The very, very big awards. There are £1 million, and there's 5 awards each year for the next 10 years to recognize the work of people who are looking to sustain and support the world, natural processes in the world, the environment, and so on and so forth. So you look at, on the one hand, there are these awards that have been instituted to recognize, and they're almost at the level of Nobel Prizes, okay, in terms of the environment and ecology. And on the other hand, there are scientific reports coming in that the use of fossil fuel is going to more than double in the next decade. So one of the people who are connected to these awards said that the decisions that we're going to take in the next decade are in fact going to impact the next 1,000 years of this planet, the future of 1,000 years, not just 10 or 50 or 60 or 100, but 1,000 years. So on the one hand, we have this sort of awareness and information and tremendous amount of knowledge that the actions that we're taking and the kind of technological innovation that we're instituting is necessary to tackle huge problems of a tremendous kind of complexity that we may not have encountered historically ever before. And yet, while there is this knowledge, there is also the continued action that goes against that knowledge. So my real question is, to everyone here, how does one deal with such contradictions? Contradictions in behavior, contradictions in intention, in action, contradictions of knowledge and action. I think those are questions that lie, fundamental questions that lie at the source of any kind of education, whether it's engineering or technological education or other kinds of education that we have at universities today, that need to address some very critical and urgent issues. So these epistemic frameworks, just to come back to the slide, also affect how we view technology and its relationship to society. So those were my opening remarks. I don't have any prescriptive comments to make like Uday had, but perhaps in the discussion, I hope we'll come back to talking some of the very fine points that Uday has made in terms of what we can do and how we can go about addressing these kind of issues.
Thanks, Aditya, for that kind of a big overview about technology itself over like thousands of years now we have covered in that few minutes. I want to just maybe transition now in the next 20 minutes or so, where the two of you will talk about, why is it even necessary to reimagine technology education? Because, every generation thinks that they're at kind of a very unique point, turning point in their history, and that they're, they need to do something unique. But is it something like that now, or is it something fundamentally different? Because, one of the things we mentioned was the Industry 4.0. And also, why is there a fierce urgency of now as people correct? So why and why now? And as I know Uday likes to say this, old wine in a new bottle or new wine in an old bottle, that kind of stuff. So I wanted, Uday first to respond, maybe in 5 minutes or so about this, why make the case for reimagining technology education that, it's happening a little bit around post 2000, I would say, in many universities in the US and some in Europe, and also increasingly now in India. So Uday, could you please touch upon that? And Aditya, please feel free to add after Uday done, your perspective as well.
Thank you. Sure. They are on mute, I think, still.
Waiting that part, yeah. So this is a very interesting question, Rama, and also a difficult one, though it looks easy to formulate. Because this is the kind of question one has to periodically look at it. I think reimagining only in 2021 is not enough. I think that's what I meant by dynamism. This is a constant evolution. Every year one has to go and reimagine and think that, okay, what we did last year, is it okay or not? Of course, given the certain practicalities, we may make some changes. We can't really overhaul everything. Maybe every 5 years or every decade, one can think of really overhauling the whole thing. One of the reasons I think is technology itself has changed profoundly in the last 20, 30 years. The impact also on society of technology is quite phenomenal. Earlier, it was not that much. And I can give the example of India much more so. If you go back 20, 25 years ago, people were not that receptive to technology. If you mention some new technology, I remember even talking to people, and I'm not talking about rural India, I'm talking about urban India, people who are highly educated, and they would say, oh, but I can do it. I don't need it. I can do it without it. Now, that was the approach. Now, today, if I talk to the same people, okay, things are much different. There is a reception. Aha, can I do it better? I will use it. Okay. Now that has changed profoundly. One maybe because I come from that area, I may say telecommunication technology. You can look at vehicles. The automobiles have changed so dramatically in the last 20, 25 years. Even in India, from an ambassador car to what we are driving today. There's a profound change out here. In all respect, the way we communicate with each other. And I believe some of the technologies have been so global that the impact is quite phenomenal. Internet is one such technology. It has kind of become so pervasive today in the country that it's not just you and I, but there are many who feel that without that, suddenly they feel that something is missing in their life today. Even if you go to a rural India, I think it has become that way. So I think what has happened is now, point is that once that has taken place, we need to start looking at education as to are we incorporating some of these technologies. The second most important thing which has happened is, and internet is again a big player out here. Early days, information was very difficult to get. Most of us had one or two books related to a topic. Guys who got hand on it in the beginning, we had a slight advantage. Professors could also teach from a particular book, and it will be a nice surprise in the classroom because students didn't have access to it. Today, information is pervasive. If I'm teaching, say, Maxwell's equations, I can look at a discourse on Maxwell's equation by the top physicist or electrical engineer from MIT or Stanford. And it's available out there. It's not a big deal. Fine, I may have to do a little bit of search. Now, what am I going to do as a professor when I enter the classroom, assuming that the students have already had access to this information? Or they will compare me also. After I've given my lecture, they will go back. Okay. And they can access again, the lecture by Levine, who might have taught, the famous professor at MIT, of course, he retired recently. Okay. And they can review his lecture on Maxwell's equations and my lecture on Maxwell, and they'll find, oh, so now one has to reimagine education even much more so because of this, which is a good thing. Frankly, I really like access to it because now it is not confined to a sector which had certain resources in it. It is open to everybody. Really, a democratization has taken place, which is a fantastic thing. But in that context, the whole education has to now change. You don't have to be a great orator in a classroom and kind of, give a discourse on a topic. There are enough great orators in the world. I can kind of, with a few clicks, I can listen to it. So this is the other part. The third part, which is in some sense not so positive, is the youth has changed dramatically. Okay, because they are growing up with technology. And I can remember when most of us went to universities or colleges, it was like a great experience to look at these labs with all these machines, all these kind of instruments. We were all dazzled with it. Okay, even when one went to US for it, suddenly you saw PDP-11 computers, light blinking, and it was really a dazzling. Today, that is no longer the case. It is so difficult to excite the youth. The fellow has seen everything before he comes to college, in some sense. Okay, the attention span is small. They are not, that's the negative part, that they are unwilling to think about something over hours together, something which was pretty common in the olden days. Here, unless within 10 minutes, if they can get something, and I think some of us also victim to the same syndrome, that it doesn't work. Now, how do we take this also into account? So you cannot ignore the aspirations of the youth. You cannot ignore the information and the knowledge which the youth comes with. Today they come with a lot more knowledge than compared to when the students came, say in the 70s, 80s, even in the 90s, even early 2000 was still okay. 2010, in my opinion, was the big inflection point when the students who came, they came with a lot of knowledge with them on certain aspects. Now, how do we, and the reason they had knowledge is because of technology. So again, that forces us to reimagine education, that how do we take this into account? So I'll stop here. Of course, one can go on and on with this particular topic. It's a fairly important topic and has a lot of wide implications. But I'll just stop at this particular point. We'd like to also hear from Aditya and others.
Sure. Well, Rama, you want me to add anything?
Well, why don't you go and then I'll just say a couple of things that came to my mind when Uday was talking. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I just wanted to address the question that you asked, are we at a unique point in history, or is it just something we're imagining, and this has been the case always? I personally think, and of course, no way of knowing whether this is right or not. We are at a unique point, and I think that point, if I can identify, it begins with, in a sense, with the splitting of the atom. It's a fundamental shift that has happened, and the possibilities that arise out of that in terms of human beings being the authors of their own destiny as a species. And this is also what climate change represents. Something on a global scale. So there's always been the impact of human activity on the environment or on ecology throughout history. In fact, one of the one of the predominant theories for a while was that Harappan civilization died out because of human activity, because of desertification. It changed the whole structure of the landscape and so on. But I think that at the scale at which it's happening and the complexity hasn't been there before. And clearly also the kind of urgency that there is, if we're to believe, and I do believe, all climate scientists, if we don't act now, the planet is going to become uninhabitable for many, many thousands and millions of people. And not just human beings, but also plant and animal species. So I think we are at a very critical point in terms of the evolution of the planet and of course also human evolution. So we need to urgently rethink and transform our paradigm of acting and thinking.
Yeah, thanks. I think in some ways, both of you kind of pointing out that this is a kind of a unique moment in our history. And, Uday even pointed to a more narrower time scale, which I agree somewhat saying, post 2000, 2010, somewhere there's kind of a, real change in the slope of the things that were going on. Say, in fact, my daughter always makes fun of me saying, I'm a digital immigrant. So I was born before the internet, became available, and she's a digital native. She was born after the internet was, and then I keep telling her, some of the best things that have happened for education is the internet. And some of the worst things that have happened to education is also internet. So same answer for both things. So we have to be kind of wary about, so much information out there, but how do you kind of critically evaluate the authenticity of that information and so on. So Aditya, I'd like to turn to you and then Uday, please respond after he makes his point. Your background in anthropology, which is kind of, I would say in some sense, humans, technology, culture, society, that kind of the intersection of that is what you study. I feel that you probably told me this before that, humans kind of both create the technology, and so they have the kind of direction that they can take to do that, but they are also influenced by technology, later on after something has been created, right? So what are the some imperatives of this kind of, human technology interaction or interface on education? I'm focusing more on the technology education. Sometimes I use engineering, sometimes use technology, somewhat interchangeably, but not very accurate. But I think for this purpose of this discussion, we could do that. Mm-hmm. So, is it become more important now that, again, as you mentioned, the fourth industrial revolution, like the AI and data and robots, etc., has education taken a different kind of a turn, the way that we need to look at it? So, from your anthropology kind of hat, if you could.
All right. Then Uday. If I can answer that question. If I may, I just wanted to, I can sort of preface some of my comments by saying, I think when we think about human societies, we automatically must think about technology. So in a sense, the evolution of human societies goes hand in hand with the kind of invention and evolution of technology, and this has been going on for millions of years. So I can't really separate it. And what that actually implies, or what that suggests, is that that technology suggests a shift in thinking. If we think about, early hominids, talking from a point of view of an anthropologist, in thinking and conceptual thinking, particularly in making tools and instruments and so on, and that you're probably aware of, and also in the imagination and predictive thinking. And so all the kind of economies that we look at that have existed prior to the industrial one, the pastoral economy or the agricultural or the hunter-gatherer, they all involve the use of technology to survive. So I think that our kind of association with technology has to do with survival. And I'll try and answer this question in terms of education also, which you put, has to do with physical survival. So throughout history or throughout evolution, technology has actually, supported being able to survive as a species. But if we look today, that very drive for survival is somehow turning on itself. And I think that's what needs to be addressed in education also. That desire or that expertise that we've developed as a species to survive is now causing kinds of ecological and environmental imbalances that are affecting human societies as well, let alone, plant society, plant species and animal species. So how does one actually address this question of, what has made us, in a sense, the most successful, or one of the most successful, I won't say the most successful, maybe bacteria are more successful, or cockroaches are more successful in surviving, at least in terms of years. That itself is, in a sense, turning on to us, that quest for survival. So how does one reimagine education to address this question of letting go of certain kinds of ways of modes of operating inside the world that are detrimental? I don't know if that's making sense. So kind of transformational education that situates human beings once again inside of an ecological framework rather than being separate from it. So I think that's kind of what's required today, so that the destruction that is going on, that we see all over the place, is somehow halted. That, in a sense, address what you're looking for, Rama, or was there something additional?
That's good. We're also coming to the other points you touched upon a little later in the discussion. So, we can hold on to those thoughts and come back to it. If Uday wants to add something, and then.
Yeah, sure. I agree with what Aditya is saying completely. I think it is, but several things out here. First, I'd like to talk about one point that Aditya made, which is important, if you allow me. He talked about contradictions and resolving and those contradictions. In kind of relates to also the comment that is made just now in some sense. So I think this is a continuum. You have contradictions, you have a discourse, you have a resolution, you have more contradictions. You have a discourse, okay, you have some resolutions, you have further contradictions. It's like Einstein's theory didn't stop, right? It raised more questions. It just solved Schrodinger's equation. Okay, right. It solved some problem, but it raised 10 other problems. Some of them are solved, one is still working on. So in that sense, what I would say is that this is part of life. It goes on ad infinitum, this whole sequence in some sense, in a very simplistic manner. Contradictions, discourse, resolution, new contradictions, and you keep going. Okay. Now coming back to this other part that Aditya mentioned, as I said, I'm in agreement with it. But technology is a double-edged sword. I don't know of any technology which has not been used for good as well as for bad. Anything you pick, I mean, I think it started since fire already was there, but since we learned how to harness fire, and from there it started. The fire can be used for destruction, and the fire can be used for so many positive things, and all of us are beneficiaries of those positive things. Now, what has happened is that, yes, there has been, for various reasons, and one can get into that, in some sense, a phenomenal growth of technology, particularly if you look at, if I look at the post-1950s, the fundamental contribution to sciences have been rather minimal. Bulk of them came between, like pre-war, during the war, just after the war. If you look at particularly 1960 onwards, it's more in terms of how to create technologies, how to do things better, how to make life more comfortable, etc., etc. And it is continuing that way in some sense. Some contributions are coming up, but still not the way it came up maybe in the like 1905 when Einstein came up with his relativity theory, and then Heisenberg, quantum physics, etc., etc. Okay. So what happens now is we have developed so much that suddenly we feel that the world is going to come to an end. There are both sides. So the climate change is the classic example. There are a lot of debates going on that politicians are now worried about, and genuinely they should be. In fact, I agree with this so much that before my tenure got over, one of my last contributions at IIT Hyderabad was to start a department of climate change. I said the least one should do is discuss. He said, I have no answer to how to solve this problem, but if you have a department, you will start talking about it. And the same questions that Aditya raised, and I'm hoping that along with scientists, the human social science faculty will also get involved and start looking at those issues. Okay, because these are very broad things. But I'm very hopeful in the sense we have tackled such problems in the past. For example, when I look at the early part, like the 70s, nuclear thing was very big, and people thought that the world is going to come to an end. We need one guy to press a button and we'll all perish. But we have survived. Not just survived, we have flourished. Let's put it that way. So somehow through cooperation in some very unusual manner, and that itself is a topic of separate debate, as to what kind of cooperation. We have, in principle, avoided a nuclear holocaust. Okay, this is something which I remember in the 70s was so many debates took place. The way we are talking about climate change, the same kind of debates were taking place. Before climate change came into existence, we used to talk about the ozone layer, about 10, 15 years ago. Now what has happened is technology has actually played a role in bringing down the ozone layer. You must have read reports. The ozone hole has shrunk. We have actually tackled that problem, in some sense. And what did we do? We made sure that I'm forgetting the thing, the coolant that we were using in our refrigerator.
The CFC, the CFCs.
So we have made sure that CFC, there was a campaign, of course. The politicians got into it, the industries got into it, the technologies got into it. Everybody came together. CFC was, we stopped using CFCs. The corporate made a point that we will develop technologies, so CFC will not be there. We stopped using those sprays. We said, no, we will have normal sprays, etc., etc. The products are not available. So the industry said, we will not develop those products, we'll develop alternate products. And the scientists and the technologists went and said, okay, we will come up with new forms of coolant, which are not as harmful. In the process, we covered this. So I think if different segments of societies come together and make up their mind, we can tackle this climate change problem. We have done in the past. It is not that it's not done. Of course, the scale of this, in my opinion, is perhaps much bigger than the ozone layer. Ozone layer was a much smaller problem, but maybe somewhat closer to the nuclear holocaust that we used to debate and discuss when we were students, and maybe even the first 5-10 years of our career as faculty members. So it is possible to tackle it.
Yeah, Uday, Aditya, I want to just take 1 minute and then we'll open it for Q&A. We promise that in the halfway point, we'll open for Q&A. And you mentioned some of the things that I want to talk about, but I want to bring you back to the kind of the reimagining technology education, because that's kind of the main topic of the day, which is, you talked about these unintended, quote unquote, consequences of, for example, unbridled use of energy, right, for development, right? That's what was done in the, in the 20th century. But then we probably didn't really pay or understand that this will lead to some disasters like climate change, for example. Can we use, how can we think about using some of those examples, etc., in education so that we can be kind of, be more prepared, upstream rather than downstream? As in the case of climate change, we are doing some things downstream. But in the case of AI or robots, etc., can we use some of them upstream? So that's a question that I also wanted to raise. But maybe we can just keep that in our mind, and you can bring it up in some of your responses later on. And now maybe we'll open up about 10 minutes for the audience. And Siddhant, if you have the questions that have come from the audience, we could take it, or then you can unmute the person who has posted that question, and then we'll continue. Right now we have covered kind of why and why now kind of aspect. After we come back, we'll cover a little bit of the what and the how. What are the techniques and tools that we can use to kind of tweak this education in some ways that Uday and Aditya will talk about. So
Siddhant, maybe you can unmute everybody. It's a small group, it's not a big group, and they can just ask questions directly.
So there are some questions that are in the chat box, so maybe he can identify. Sure. I think he's telling me that.
No, we have one question from Aryan who shared it via chat. So Aryan, if you want to unmute yourself and ask it directly to the panel members, that would be great.
Yes, sure.
Go ahead, Aryan.
You're on mute still. On mute.
You're still on mute.
Hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. Yes. So please, can you tell me how will this help the students actually?
What will help the students? How will what help?
I'm just that how will technology empower students to control their own learning? Like.
So if I understand correctly, how does technology, help in kind of students to be better learners? And is that what you're talking about, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Uday, if you want.
No, I mean, pandemic is a great example. Okay. I mean, people have learned a lot during pandemic because of technology. The normal thing was I would go to a chalkboard or a whiteboard and lecture out there. Okay. And then you would listen, you'll take down notes on your notebooks, etc. Whatever it was, and learn from there. And there were some hard copy textbooks. Now, all that went out of the window just overnight because of the pandemic. And today, whatever learning that has happened in the last, whatever, 18 to 20 months, it's all because of technology, on lectures using technology, like you and I are participating today. Okay, you are asking me questions, I'm answering a question, maybe not to your satisfaction fully, okay, because of technology. Okay, by the same token, tomorrow when you listen to lectures, it will be there. Now, what is going to happen, so technology does play a big aid in terms of learning, but technology is not which will make you learn. Finally, you have to sit down, spend time, maybe in front of the screen or with a book, okay, and you have to learn yourself. That technology can never do. Okay, I mean, we don't have electrodes which will go and make you learn something, right? That day may come someday, I don't know. I'm just saying. But today, so it's a vehicle by which I can facilitate and make things easier for you so that all the necessary information, all the necessary knowledge is available to you. And also it is explained to you from different facets. Earlier, I would learn knowledge through one facet that my teacher told me. Today, I can learn the same knowledge from 5 different facets because I listen to my teacher. I can also listen to a teacher somewhere else, maybe 4 other teachers who are in the 4 other corners of the world. And now I have the choice of assimilating it, by integrating their thoughts together and creating my own thoughts. This is making sense to you, Aaron?
Yes, sir. It's truly making
Yeah.
sense.
So,
Add something to that?
yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I just, Aryan, that's a great question. And I just would add to what Professor Desai said, that, I mean, it's so great that we are able to communicate, and have this exchange. And this is because of technology. So, it's because of this technology. And like Professor Desai said, over the pandemic, that you can actually be in touch and be in communication and exchange with people who are so far away that you would, normally not be able to meet. And then, of course, there's this tremendous, which also came up in the discussion, I think Professor Desai mentioned it, Uday mentioned it, this proliferation of information and knowledge that you can gain on the internet. That's truly remarkable, and there are different, in fact, some new kinds of disciplines or methods that are emerging. For example, there's something called digital humanities that has emerged out of that. So you use digital techniques to actually evaluate and analyze social science data on a tremendous scale. Because if I read a book, I can manage to read maybe, I don't know how many, 1,000 books in a lifetime or 10,000. But if you use technology, then you can access hundreds and thousands of books or hundreds, big data and analyze different patterns and trends and so on. So that's all adding to our way of, understanding what's going on in the world. So that's what, and of course, but the question of learning remains, whether you have technology or not. That's up to you.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Right.
So
Thank you for that.
there are several questions that are coming to me. I don't know whether Siddharth, are you getting them too?
Siddharth
Yes.
is asking, somebody has a hand up called Siddharth J.
Okay. After that, I think Neeraj has questions, so I will have Neeraj ask after that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Rama. This is Siddharth.
Can we see you?
Adit-
You can turn your video on also.
I'm
Just for a
so
moment.
sorry. I'm sitting in a dark room. Okay, let me
okay.
try.
Okay.
I don't have too much light on. I'm sorry
Okay.
for this.
Good excuse.
Let me just try. So, Aditya, you spoke about unstructured learning, and I kind of intuitively.
That was Uday, actually.
Oh, that was Uday. Okay.
Doesn't matter.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Doesn't matter. You just go ahead.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. See, so I intuitively kind of understand that, but as an educator, how do you design or how do you structure the unstructured learning experience? Can you deconstruct that a bit more?
You want me to take that, Arama?
Yeah, it was for you, right?
Okay. Now, this is a great question. I think it's a great question. And let me tell you, I'm going to take a little extra time, the history behind how it started. It's more like what used to happen in IIT Bombay, we wouldn't get students in a classroom. And this is more than 20 years ago. So colleagues and we used to discuss, where are we going wrong? And some of the professors at IIT Bombay were fantastic teachers. So how come they are not coming? And when we discussed, which I used to talk to students also, why you're not coming and what are you doing, this, that, suddenly found that these guys were far creative in things they were doing in the hostels. And so suddenly, we came up with this sort of a catchphrase saying that time to bring hostels into the classroom. hostels into the laboratory, rather than the other way around. And that's where this notion of unstructured thing began. And also, so now I can go into the polemics of it, but to answer your question, see, what we need to do is, see, I cannot explain to you Pythagoras' theorem in an unstructured manner. But what I could do is, I could give this problem to the students and saying that, do you see relationship in this triangle? And leave it, not talk about it. And this people have done, by the way, not necessarily with Pythagoras theorem. I have a colleague who teaches Python. So how does he teach Python, for example? He goes to the class and gives a small coding problem. He doesn't teach Python to start with, zero. And says, okay, now you have information about Python in the wiki, this, that, read whatever you want. I'll come up after half an hour and you must write a small code in Python, okay, to solve this particular problem. It's a simple problem, nothing very complicated. It could be even write a Python code for maybe doing this search or multiplying or doing something like that. A very simple thing. And he walks out of the classroom. A colleague of mine in Hyderabad called Ashokan. So Ashokan just walks out. Then after half an hour, he comes back and say, okay, let me see what all you have done. Okay, this is totally unstructured, right? A conventional course on Python will be, you start up, what is Python? The history of Python. Then you say, okay, this is how the Python code is written. This is the data structure for Python, etc., etc. So what you do is you turn the tables around. This takes longer, by the way. I can give a fantastic lecture in 1 hour on Python and finish everything. But what Ashokan is doing takes longer. I have another faculty at IIT Hyderabad. In fact, he was my PhD student. He does the same thing. He teaches probability theory and stochastic processes using Raspberry board and Arduino boards. He asks people to do data processing, draw things and say, okay, now what probability distribution do you see? Can you figure that out? He just turned the tables around. What I would do typically is I'll teach probability distribution first. Then I will say, okay, do this experiment. Aha, you see a normal curve or you see a Laplacian, etc. Okay, so he's just turned around. So this is what I meant by unstructured. That is, you kind of, there is no reason to go from chapter 1 to chapter 7. You can start with 3 and then go back to 1, start with 6 and go back to 2. Right. So I agree with you. I don't have a full solution. Okay. Right. But I think I know how excitement is to be brought. So my main purpose of mentioning of this is, as professors, we need to experiment. We may fail, so be it.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. But if we experiment, then eventually we'll come with some interesting answers.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's I think interesting.
That can we move on, because there are 2 more questions that I want to.
Sure.
We have to cover some other things. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Neeraj, you had a question, and particularly more than one question that you're sending me, but one of them that I think may be interesting for the group to address is, this kind of divide, digital divide of access, etc., among diverse populations, for example, etc. So can you please go and ask that question?
Yeah. So my question is more related to careers in technology. So I basically handle a career portal. So I was very surprised and pleasantly so by the discussion we have had so far, because it was very less on technology and it was a very 30,000 and maybe beyond kind of feet understanding. Now, but that's exactly my question for students who are maybe starting up and looking at careers in technology in the next 5 years or next 10 years. It becomes very fuzzy for them. And so with such an august panel, I would like to throw it to you and just try and give us some pointers as to how we can assist students in understanding whether technology is a direction for them or not. Yeah.
Maybe Aditya wants to go first.
Uday, you go ahead. I think
you want to go ahead. Okay.
More equipped to answer.
If I understand correctly, what you mean is, you correct me if I'm wrong, Neeraj, that what should students do? Okay, so that 4 years down the road, they will get a job or something. Let's see, today what has happened is that the point? I mean, that they will have enough technological know-how that they will get a good employment. Is that what it is?
Not really. It's more about how can they be sure that technology is something they can build a career on? Because early on, it's quite fuzzy, and technology is also taking so many dimensions. Like Aditya mentioned, that environment is a very big concern for technology now. So how does one select technology?
No, I see it's going to be, that's a very difficult thing to answer. I think most people that I know of select based on, what financial gains I'm going to get, whether I will get, like in IIT, somebody gets a job which is 1.5 crores. It has happened, by the way. It becomes national news. Okay, so people are normally looking at it from whatever experience and discussions I've had with students. The pay package or whatever, the economic factor becomes very important. And in some sense, somehow whether they have the aptitude or not, they mold themselves towards that direction to learn. That's why there is a mad rush for computer science today. Anybody, I mean, I've had enough phone calls after the JEE advanced results saying that, I'm not getting computer science here, but I'm getting it there. Is that a good place to go for computer science? Okay, I won't name the IITs out here, but this is going on. So my suggestion to students would be that don't worry about all these things. You can pick up. So two things I would say. Okay, let me put two. One is do something which you will enjoy. Now, many kids are not quite clear on this. When I ask them, okay, what is it that you enjoy? So I used to spend time in counseling also earlier. You like physics, you like chemistry, you like mathematics. I would grill them a little bit, not grill, just have a chat with them and then try to guide them saying, okay, I think you are enjoying physics a lot more than pure math. Maybe this is what you should look at. So what I would say is first ask yourself that question. That is for the students, and then pick your branch. If you like thermal science, mechanics, you're enamored with Newtonian mechanics, whatever, then go to mechanical engineering. Okay, and let's hope the faculty will really make things interesting for you. Okay, you don't have to go to computer science. The second thing I would say is this is more towards the educators. The trouble is we have compartmentalized education a lot. So what happens once you get into mechanical, it's like, you are computer scientists are your rivals. You're not going to do all that. You're going to do what I will tell you in mechanical. I think we need to create the, dissolve these barriers in some sense. Even if I am in mechanical, I can still acquire a lot of skills in computer science and vice versa. Because if I am doing robotics in computer science, I better know enough of mechanical engineering. Okay, so I think as educationists, if we can blur all these barriers which we have created over the years, and there are good reasons for it. So I'm not saying we made a mistake or it was wrong thing to do. These are historical evolution. There were reasons behind it why we did it. Okay, but I think time has come now to kind of merge them. I'm not saying you have to dissolve it so much that each one loses their identity. No, but you have to blur the boundaries so I can migrate back. I don't need a visa to go from one place to another place. We should create passports like the Singaporean passport or the Japanese passport. They can travel practically any country in the world without a visa. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to create. That, my feeling, will actually become more joyful for the students, and they will be much more mature in choosing their career path as they go along.
Yeah.
I'll stop at this point.
Yeah. Aditya, there was a couple of questions. I want to read it so that at least people are aware of it. One says, technology seems to be creating a divide in the society in terms of access and excellence in education. And in India, particularly also the language, the multiple languages create their own kind of barriers in that. So I don't know exactly the question was, but I think this is something that you should be cognizant about in terms of challenges and opportunities for education is something that I read there. And there was also another question by Professor Rudra Pratap about, how, many examples of doomsday scenarios have been there before, like Uday also mentioned, right? We have come out of it, even flourished, as he said. So how do we kind of inculcate this sense of optimism, even as we are educating engineers and technologists, if I kind of paraphrase that correctly. So anyway, these two did come up. You can bring it up in your discussions either now, or we do have to move on soon for the next part of the session. Aditya, please go ahead. You had
maybe the first question, if I can, briefly address it.
Yes, right down his aisle, So
yeah, sort of. I mean, the thing is that I think I don't. Of course, I'm not sure about this, but I think the way we put the question, that technology is creating a divide. It's not. Technology is not creating a divide, I would say. And, maybe that's too bold to say that, but that divides already exist. And, they need to be addressed with some other kind of mechanisms. There are already tremendous divides, economic divides, as you said, linguistic barriers, all kinds of social divisions, different communities not communicating with one another. And this has been happening for a long, long period of time. And technology, in a sense, finds itself, let's not blame technology, in a sense, Technology finds itself inside of this social milieu or social environment. There is already one in which divisions exist. So those divisions then get enhanced. Some people have more privilege, other people have less privilege. But how do you address that? These are kind of ongoing. Even if you look back historically, 2,000 years, you look back and whatever text that existed in India talking about societies, then those kind of divisions existed in some form or another. And then you have technology, and then we tend to think that technology is actually creating those divisions. I would say those divisions already exist, and technology gets created inside of certain social and political and philosophical ecologies. And that's what we need to be conscious of, because those philosophies or contexts perpetuate these kind of issues that, that I think, who was it, Neeraj, or sorry, someone else was asking.
Okay.
That's
okay.
just that part of the question, not to the doomsday part. We can talk about that later on.
Yeah, so shall we move on? Maybe we can come back to the kind of a question and answer session or discussion at the end of the thing. We have about 30 minutes left. Uday and Aditya, we want to touch upon this kind of the what and the how part, if at all we can.
Yes.
And I believe, Uday, you mentioned that, it's, historically, I know that I'm familiar somewhat more with the United States, the way that engineering education kind of evolved. The beginning, when the Industrial Revolution, kind of the second industrial revolution, which it happened more in the United States, happened, people moved from the farms to the cities for factories and so on. So they lost this kind of hands-on, experiential learning that they had working on the farms. And so education then was saying, we need to put more. This was around 1900, late 19th century, around 1900. And then by 1950s or 60s, this is kind of engineering science, kind of, application of the principles of science and math to problems, etc. That became more prevalent. And I think that lasted at least until 2000 or even more. Now this seems to be coming back, this experiential learning, hands-on learning, etc. So, can you can you talk about this, Uday, about this, this kind of a cycle? It's coming back in a full circle in some sense. You mentioned that in earlier in our conversations once, and also about this kind of this. You also talked about this, the T-shaped engineer, the pie-shaped engineer, or whatever, the Y-shaped engineer. There's all kinds of shapes that you can have, which combine, purpose, depth, and breadth, etc. So talk briefly about that, and then Aditya, if you could then talk about kind of the importance of infusing ethics into education in the training of engineers and technologists. How can we do it? I know it's not like a course you take and check the box, right? It's by case studies and other kinds of things. So if you could talk about that later after Uday is done, so then we can move on. Uday.
In fact, see, what you're saying is true. I think we do go back and forth, and that is partly related to the kinds of things Aditya also was referring to. When something is good, we keep on doing more and more of it until suddenly it starts saturating. Okay. It's like, we kept on developing technology, thinking life is great, this, that. In fact, I remember that we used to judge the development of a society by the amount of energy they were consuming. And now that has become a bottleneck, So really saying, whoops, what the hell did we do out there, right? So I think, it was like, and now we are going back saying that, look, reduce your consumption, be careful, modulate, etc. I think the same thing in education. We started, I remember when I went through, it was more of science-based engineering. I must have spent so much time on all kinds of scientific courses that half the time I thought, that's why I keep talking about physics so often. Okay. Even chemistry, we used to learn a lot about science. So we spent so much time, and engineering was about maybe 2.5 years out of 5-year program those days. So, but now what has happened is, we slowly the engineering start dominating, and it became theoretical, all kinds of, things happened. And now suddenly we find that, look, we have engineers who are coming up, they're great people, but we need people who can actually do things. Okay, who can also work with their hands. Of course, the concept of working with the hand today is very different than what it was maybe in the 60s and 70s. Nobody is going to grease their fingers. Factory floors are pretty much automated. I've seen the Suzuki factory floor in Tokyo, in Japan, in Shizuoka, in fact, city. And it, the amount of robotics they have is just mind-boggling. You have very little to do with your hands in some sense. So I think we need to bring this back. You said experiential learning is now very much vital in terms of how you go about thinking of concepts. And this is an interesting challenge because many professors who have come forward, assistant professors in particular, they have not gone through it. So they have to kind of now, in some sense, learn themselves also as to how they are going to teach this experiential learning to their students. You know, one of the things I talk about in experiential learning is like having a maker lab. Okay. In fact, I go one step further, or rather one step backwards. Let's put it that way. I always emphasize nowadays on the breaker lab. So I said, along with the maker lab, you must also have a breaker lab. You know, somewhat. No, this is something which is done in Japan, by the way, formally. Though it was kind of humorously talked about in the movie Three Idiots. Okay, but I think it is formally done in Japan, where they break open refrigerators, microwave ovens, you know, computers, you know, television screens, what the cameras, and then they study them. Okay, well, how it works, what happened, what are the components, where it goes, what role the components play. I think, you know, so in some sense, to me, the maker breaker is what one need to kind of create that, and I think that will enhance experiential learning. That's the reason I liked when I talked about GVV Sharma. Okay, the way he teaches probability theory. You know, he says, and I asked them to do programming on a Raspberry board, and then I start extracting. You know, personally, I've not fully understood how it does that. I'm more of a traditional educator of probability theory and stochastic processes. That's how GVV learned from me. But GVV has now turned the table around and created this whole topic, which looks so theoretical, into an experiential learning topic. That credit goes to GVV. Okay, so I think these are the ways one has to do. So I completely agree that time has come. And it's going to be challenged not so much for the students. I feel the challenge is more for the faculty, because the faculty was taught in a traditional manner, but now the faculty has to teach in a non-traditional manner. The reimagined manner that we have all been discussing, you know, right now, the reimagined manner that at Plaksha that we have been talking about. So you'll have to kind of reimagine and then teach it. So, but it's okay. The faculty itself, it's a fun thing to learn when the faculty is also learning. You know, I mean, if you recall some courses like that, you remember those were perhaps the most enjoyable courses. The faculty is also teaching it for the very first time. Rather than the faculty when he taught you after having 10 years of teaching, when he or she would come and teach you, or they would come and teach you. It will be very different. So I think it's going to be a great time for the students. You know. So that's one part. Tea education, yes, I think a lot has been talked about, the breadth, as you said, pie, tea, whatever shapes you can pick. The point is that education should not become monolithic. Let's put it that way. You know, whatever shapes that you pick. And it has to be kind of, you know, a multitude of things come in. And one of the things that I talk about is, you know, this is an obsession with faculty, that you want to cover a lot of material. Now, I mean, I don't have 42 hours are not enough for me to cover this. I will take extra lectures. I will do this. I will do that. And I have a small anecdote, you know, kind of from Kelkar, who was the founding director of IIT Kanpur. So one faculty goes to him and says, you know, Professor Kelkar, you know, young faculty, I'm unable to cover the whole chapter in the semester that you have allocated. I need, instead of having 3 contact hours per need, I need 4. Then Kelkar says, young man, sit down, have a cup of tea. And he says, I hired you not to cover the whole textbook. I hired you to uncover a few chapters in this particular textbook. You know, so I think, you know, this pumping information. In fact, I have a slide out here, and I like about, you know, I'll just, if you allow me, I'll flash it. Do I have time to do that? Take 1 second. It is basically, it's like, you know, trying to show. I hope I know. Can people see this slide?
Yeah.
So you look at MIT, look at Stanford, look at Berkeley. The number, these credit hours are contact hours. MIT has 90 contact hours in their whole BTech program or the BS program. And we are talking of one of all 3 are the top 3 or the 3 best institutes in the world. Okay, and I gave lectures to many people in India, other places also. They do still impact is very little. You know, that we just pump too much information. So I think, you know, the breadth, and I'll just stop sharing it. Okay, can you ask? Okay, I'll go on top. Okay, the amount of information we pump, I think is not necessary. We don't have to teach everything. You know, you should remember the kids are smart. In fact, I always walk into a classroom saying they're smarter than me. If not, the world will not progress. Right? They have to be smarter than I was or I am. So they will pick up things. You don't have to tell them everything to do. And I think that should be the approach, I would say, in the tea education. So I'm not spending too much time on it. I'm just saying, you know, it cannot be monolithic, basically. The length, breadth, width, all the things have to come into the picture. And it's up to us to reimagine in a manner. You know, and don't worry if you are unable to teach something. So be it. The kid can pick it up on it. So kid shouldn't say, the smart students, all students will pick it up.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks. Aditya, you still
Yeah.
remember the question I asked you?
Yeah.
Otherwise, okay.
I remember the question very well.
Okay.
I think it's a great question about, and it's a kind of a concern, right? Because we're talking about the ways in which technology is developing, it's galloping along, and there's so many consequences. And how does one actually manage or tackle or navigate that landscape, which in a sense is unpredictable? So I think one of the ways, as you're suggesting, Rama, is to introduce this business of ethics into education, or engineering education, or technology education. And I think that's a great idea. I mean, clearly ethics or ethical thought has been around for a very, very long time. People have been asking this question, what is the right action? What is the consequences of my action? And other things, how can I live a happy life and be a social being, etc. Okay. So having said that, I'm a little bit, I'm sort of questioning or skeptical about the potential that ethical studies can actually achieve. That they don't always do that, because if you look at the reality of how people operate, if you think of, for example, what happened in Wall Street, people were operating in a very unethical manner. The crash that happened about a decade ago, or so on and so forth. So I think there's what you mentioned about case studies is very important, because that makes some very abstract, perhaps ethical theory very concrete. And to be able to actually envision and relate to the consequences of certain kinds of technological innovation, or the consequences of the kinds of actions that we're taking on a, even if possible, on a personal level, then I think that would be very impactful, rather than doing it on an abstract level. So I think that gap needs to be bridged between a very abstract level and the more concrete, through case studies, for example. Because otherwise we remain a kind of conceptual thinking, and our actions don't reflect that sort of, concern that conceptual thinking has. So definitely I would endorse that idea of bringing some sort of, broadly speaking, ethical thinking, but through case studies and seeing how, different consequences can arise in terms of technology.
Just to add to that, there is this at the National Academy of Engineering in the United States, there's a big effort going on in this particular aspect of collecting case studies, but obviously most of them are from kind of the US centric examples. And I was actually going to ask you, is there something worthwhile and valuable to to collate and create kind of Indian context examples? The only thing I remember was like Bhopal accident, when it was like so long ago, like 40, 50 years ago, but there must have been some other ones. And this is now, there's an online ethics center that the National Academy has created, where there's hundreds of examples that are there that can be used for teaching and learning. So anyway, there are things there, but I think more contextual examples could be useful. We have about, I'd say 15 minutes, and we can maybe stop here. There are a few other points that I was wanting to cover, but as Uday said, let's not worry about covering everything. Let's focus on the uncovering part. So maybe just leave it, come back to it if there is time from the audience, if they can, participate in the discussions. We'll open it up for Q&A from the audience at this point, and then if nothing is coming up in questions, then we can come.
So
Siddhant, will you please?
was already up. I forgot. Somebody had raised that.
Vansh had his hand up. So Vansh, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question.
I can't really see it, but
somebody had the hand up in between. I forgot.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, Vansh, okay. Vansh, okay. Yeah, please go ahead, Vansh.
Yeah. So good evening to everyone, and namaste, sir. Sir, I recently passed my 12th, and as you said, I even gave my JEE. So I had some questions. Sir, so just because we are talking about technical education, sir, what changes should be made according to you in the high school only? Because, sir, like if we see US and other countries, I have seen that kids over there are competing in like our IITs participate in many competitions related to drone. Like there is UAVSI, US competition in which they basically make UAVs and compete. So, sir, I have seen by myself that some of the school students in US are competing in the same competitions. So, sir, how can we actually like bring changes in the future so that our school students can already jump into technical education during their school? Because sir, that is a very important aspect as well. And technology in school is quite ignored.
Okay. You want to take that?
Whoever wants to take that,
Okay.
Uday or Aditya.
Maybe
Okay.
Uday, I think.
Okay, fine. See, I think this is a very important point that you have raised. Oh, am I mute? No. Point that you have raised. Okay, whatever you have ideas, I think they should be there. I think school education does need an overhaul, keeping technology in mind on one hand, but I think school education cannot be totally technological centric. I'll come to that in a minute. Remind me if I forget it. So I agree with you. In fact, one of the things I feel is like we teach languages and there is so much discussion. And I think computer language should become parts and parcel, like learning English or your mother tongue or whatever it is. It is something which is there, and in coming days one has to learn and you'll evolve. Fine, we had C language and there'll be higher level languages. There was, earlier it was Fortran, then it came Pascal, then most people did C, at least in CS and EE. I think mechanical people are still doing it in Fortran. Okay, then now Python has become the big thing. Tomorrow something else will come up. So these things go on, but I think you have to acquire the basic skills. So that's the first thing I would sort of incorporate. The other thing I would do is, again, I'm all big believer in this playing things. So for example, there are these toys, which are electronic toys. And I remember years ago, this was almost maybe 15 years ago, a Lego had come up. I think they used to call it some Mind something. I forgot the full name of that thing. But we bought a few of those in IIT for first year students to play with.
Lego Mindstorms.
Mindstorm. Okay, Mindstorm. Yeah. So what you do is it comes with a microprocessor and you can build robots. Now you don't have to, a school kid can very easily do it. Yes, Mindstorm, even I think Vanch has said. Now schools can buy these Mindstorms. The trouble in school is that, we have one unit, it becomes very precious, it's under lock and key and nobody uses it except the teacher. So that defeats the purpose. So we need people who talk about corporate social responsibility to donate maybe 100 such units and let the kids play with it. If they break, so be it. Let it be breaking. Let's not punish them or get mad at them if they break. If kids are not going to break, who in heavens is going to break things? Okay, so let them break it. But I think they should have access. They should play with it. They can build things. So that takes care of the experiential learning, which we were talking about earlier, which Rama was talking about, ahead of time. Okay. Now, having said all this, I still strongly believe, and this is something we kind of ignore in our students, both in school, and I think social science and creative arts education has to be there. Often this social science education, with all due respect, Aditya, the way it is taught, it has become so boring that students get turned off. I think there needs to be some way of kind of making it, it's like even physics, if it is taught in a very mundane manner, students will get turned off. Though it's a very exciting subject, at least from my vantage point. Okay. So I think you need to create this excitement in terms of how it is being delivered, but you cannot have a monolithic technological education in the school. It has to be a holistic education where every facet, every different things are explored. Okay. And creative arts is the most neglected one, in my opinion. And what happens as you get older, you wish you had developed certain appreciation so you can talk intelligently about ragas, you can talk intelligently about various symphonies, various the nuances which are there when an actor performs on stage, etc., etc. But this is all then, hearsay and learning bits and pieces out here. But I think there is a lot of nuance out there. I think some of those things have to be incorporated in our system. And I think exposure is good enough. Everything need not be hammered in so that we win international competitions. That's a secondary point. Okay, so I'll stop here if there's anything more.
No, I think that's.
Aditya, you have any?
I fully, endorsed what Uday is saying, and what I'm hearing what is Uday is saying is also how we, create conditions or actually further and support creativity. And creativity involves also kind of going beyond your particular boundaries or silos or whatever you've created. And of course, we're talking about reimagining technology education, reimagine social science education as well. And on the same note. And to bring in those components, and like you're saying, I would like to know about ragas and symphonies. I would like to know more about quantum mechanics. Or certain aspects of mathematics, which I only know also from hearsay in a sense. So I think it really kind of goes into also one of the things maybe we wanted to discuss was this idea of interdisciplinarity, or now people talk about transdisciplinarity. That disciplines only represent made up boundaries. In fact, any object or any entity that you look at or that you encounter is an amalgam of so many multiple, from the atomic level to the social level, the economic and physics, it's all merging. Everything is in fact interconnected. But how do we talk about that? Because we become so kind of fixed in our, becoming expert domains. In fact, there was a study that came out of Stanford recently that I read, that it said that this era of, the expert is in fact coming to an end, and what people desire also in professions is a new kind of thinking, and a kind of going back in a sense to a generalist, to understanding many, many different dimensions, because that's what the current complexity requires. It requires us to be that way, flexible, and be able to think creatively and so on. So I fully endorse what they're saying.
There's one thing I do want to add, that, I think the evaluation assessment of performance after kind of secondary school, high school in India, particularly, I think is somewhat flawed, if I may say that. That is, for example, you talk about JEE, you took JEE, right, Vansh? So you don't really, nobody asks you, what did you do in your 12 years of schooling? Did you do this leadership activity? Did you do this social service? Did you do, this competition, the X, Y, or Z? Everything is dependent on your future, kind of is dependent on this one afternoon where hopefully you don't have a headache and you can really max that questions there, etc. So I think that also needs to be changed, and we are trying to do some of it at Plaksha as well in terms of that, kind of evaluation admission process. So I think that would be also important to change, not only just what is taught and how we start, but also how we are evaluated. I would just add that. So there's one more question. We have about 6 minutes. I know Professor Rudra Pratap, I think, wants to say something too, but maybe Hiram and then Professor Rudra Pratap, and then we can try to bring it to a close.
So can you people hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Great admirer of Uday Desai, sir, for the creating excellent institutions like IIT Hyderabad. And so my main question is, like, how can we use these immersive technologies like AR and VR for dispersal of education? So the main problem these days is you have all these skilled people who can teach the early years of children in rural parts of India. You have this internet connectivity and all these things, but they don't have that experiential learning thing as you have spoke about. So how can we incorporate these technologies and get that curiosity in the minds of those early children? Actually, though, they doesn't have this technological infrastructure at their homes or at their schools, at their poor background. So how can we incorporate to VR and AR? How can we make them curious and make them more intellectual in nature?
You want me to take that, Rama?
Yeah, I think so. He was addressing you, I thought.
No, this is great. AR, VR is very expensive. AR, VR, in my opinion, is going to play a big role in coming days in education. There are videos, particularly I remember, in fact, I used to lecture on it just to talk about it. And this was many years ago. Unfortunately, the development has been rather slow. In fact, one of my colleagues, I think he lives in Australia, Pradeep, he does a lot, he gives a lot of lectures on this AR, VR and other things. So what I would say is that, if you look at anatomy and if you want to learn anatomy, it's a little expensive proposition. As you see in Munna Bhai, you need bodies out there, you need skeletals out there, right? I'm sure you have seen that movie, the first one. Okay, so you can't get them, but with AR, VR, and if you make it accessible the way internet has become accessible, anybody sitting anywhere can take that anatomy, move it around. I mean, there is a video out there, literally you can move things around. You can almost like Iron Man, you can put your hands in it, twist the skeleton around and see what is inside. You can put your hand in and pull it out, what the heart out there or whatever, that is not part of the anatomy anyway. I mean, the bones and other things. So it's a very, the impact can be phenomenal. If I want to study, like as an example, internal combustion engine, I don't need an actual internal combustion engine. It will be wonderful to have one. Obviously, that's the best thing. But in the absence of owning that one thing or having that one thing, if AR, VR is inexpensive, just like the internet has become, I can actually create this whole AR, VR for internal combustion engine and understand how IC engines work, for motorcycles, for cars, for aeroplanes, everywhere it's essentially IC engines, right? So I think the impact is huge. I should have put that down I'll correct that in my slides also. I should have put AR, VR also along with 3D printing and other things that I added out there. Your point is well taken. Now, how do we make it accessible to all? Early days, it's like the phone. Those of you remember, it used to be some 20 rupees a minute or something. I remember when I first used the phone in India, outrageous amount, huge heavy duty thing, and we have to shout literally like that. Today, nobody bats an eyelid while making a call, right? And we don't even worry how long are we going to call. So I think soon it will happen. All of you, the young ones who are there out here, you should work on it and see how we can create accessible, and inexpensive, and of course, top quality. Nobody wants substandard things. AR, VR technologies.
Yeah. Hey, we have maybe we'll take the last two questions. I think Amit Sheth has a hands up, and also Soumya. Can you both ask your question one after the other, and then we can have the.
Is this a hard deadline, 8:30, Rama? Or since
well,
can we extend a little bit? I'm okay with it if Aditya is okay and you're okay. I have no issue.
I'm okay, except that I have another meeting I have to go to.
Oh,
but that's sure. Even without me, this can certainly go on.
No.
And
I think
Siddharth can handle it.
No, all three of you. No. I think we need all three. That's it.
Okay. So Amit, go first, and then Soumya,
okay,
and then
I'll just quickly start. Both Uday and Aditya mentioned about design thinking and how it's important. But I feel design thinking should not be treated as only a separate course, which is what is happening in most institutions around the world. It's like what David Kelly, the founder of D School at Stanford and IDEO, said that designers are not an expert in anything. We are generalists, right? We're the expert on the process. Now, if you recognize that design thinking is so important, I think we need to take the principles of design thinking across all our other courses in our entire planning. Then we'll have a more intuitive, practical, hands-on approach to education. So my question is, why are we still not doing it? I mean, we've been discussing a lot of this for many years at various platforms. And for why are we still, okay, Plaksha started it, fantastic. But how come other institutions are not budging?
No. Yeah, let Soumya finish her question, and then we can have, that way we can get both questions in. Yeah.
My question is quite different from the point that Amit has raised. In fact, it derives from the point that came up earlier, that we need to, at the school level itself, we need to have students be given access to gadgets and kits that they can play with, even if it, even if they end up breaking it in the process of experiential learning. So the point is that while currently we are talking in the context of university level education, there are quite a few top-notch public institutes for specialized university level education, be it in engineering or in medicine. But why do we start so late? Why isn't there a good public education system at school level? Certainly, early education is much more important and sets the foundation for lifelong learning. So this was mainly aimed at Uday, because you've been working with the education ministry. Okay, maybe this is a stretch, but certainly in the education sector in India for a long time. Why is this not been a focus? In US, this is done in a very structured way, so the benefits are reaped in a uniform manner. That's it. Thanks.
You're absolutely. See, we've done one thing. So, of course, our scales are so mind-boggling. It's like, that's why we're celebrating 100 billion doses. I'm sorry, 1 billion doses. Okay, because the scales are, see, central schools and this, whatever the Navodaya, what is it called? The Jawahar Navodaya, whatever it is. Central school was one such thing. It is a public school. Okay, the tuition fees are very small. The quality of education is very good. By and large, in most central schools, there may be one here and there. And they are there sometimes even in remotest of areas also. Because, and it's the genesis of it was that the armed forces which travel all over the country should have access to uniform education. In the process, they set up central school all over. Then, of course, people like, professors of IITs got access to it. The IS officers, their kids got access to it. And they have done a wonderful job. By and large, if you look at central school quality, what you're saying, it's a public school, just like what you is centrally done. Okay. Now, the states also need to do that. And I think the states have not done that. The state should also create this kind of a good public school system, what you're referring to, Soumya. And, and it is no rocket science, in the sense there is already a model which the center has exhibited in central schools. If you look at most of the central schools who are graduate, they've done quite well in life. I'm not saying they have to get into academic engineering and all, they can go other places also. They've done quite well, So, and in fact, it takes care of language issues also. By and large, it's a much more holistic kind of an approach that central schools have. Okay. Again, you can always pick on 1 and 2 out here. So I agree with you completely. I would say the center has shown the way in some sense. I think Jawahar Navo Vidyalaya or something, right? Yeah, that's another one. It's kind of related to it. That also has done very well. Practically, those are also all over the place in some sense. But the access to that is limited. If you are if you are working in a private organization or a corporate world, you won't have access to your kids cannot go there in some sense. You have to be a government officer in one form or the other, either autonomous, semi-autonomous bodies like IITs, NITs, things like that. Armed forces, of course, very straightforward. They have priorities out there. My feeling is state needs to do that. If every state did that and created similar kind of a situation, a large amount of this can be alleviated. The second part, to add to what you are saying is, see, the salary structures have to be also good at schools. I used to give lectures and generally ask the audience, how many of you would want your children to become IIT professors? A few hands will go up. Okay. Finally, I'll cut the story short. Finally, I come down, I would ask, how many of you want your children to become school teachers? Not a single hand would come up. Now, this is the mindset which has to change.
Amit's question. Yeah, I think that's a great point that you've raised, Amit, and I think it sort of suggests different ways of also preparing curriculums and syllabi and teaching sort of collaboratively. But that again, that would require kind of really working rigorously with the kind of structures that are already in place that tend to again promote certain streams, rather than this kind of integrative approach, which I think you're suggesting. And that again, there's so much potential in doing that, but there are also then impediments in terms of, what job am I going to get, et cetera, et cetera. All these questions come up when you try to create an integrative and creative approach to teaching, and, including in sort of an inclusive syllabus or curriculum, like you're suggesting, which includes design. So that would be my kind of take on that. I think it would be important, but again, would require a lot of shaking up of things, right? Which is, I'm sure, would be good in the long run.
Right, true. Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think, it's, as I said, unfortunately, I do have to rush, but if you want to continue, it's fine with me.
No, I think we need
to. Yeah. I think it's been a very fruitful and very kind of a exciting interaction, not only, among the two of you, Aditya, but also with the audience. And, I think it'd be nice if we can kind of have this, kind of engineering design mindset, even for designing education, where you try a few things, experiment, don't be afraid to, fail if, or not really think as a failure, but always there is learning, and to iterate and to kind of reflect and move on. So I think that kind of a mindset will be good, and hopefully it can bring some fruit to the future engineering and technology education in India. So thank you again, Uday and Aditya, for participating in this, and sorry that they had to cut it off a little shorter than we wanted, but it was a good 90 minutes with a good participation from the audience.
You had a great time.
The audience itself is very, thank you again for participating and being involved in this topic, which is very important, as you all recognize. And hopefully you will continue this conversation in other forums later on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rama.
Thank you, Rama. Thank you, Uday. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much, Rama.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.